So the fallout continues from Joe Rogan's interview with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. As of right now, the recording of this video, it's something like 7.5 thousand upvotes for that video and a massive 47,000 downvotes. Now, this isn't like bots or people coming in. These are Rogan's core supporters that are upset with this video. And that's what Rogan should be concerned about. Now, look, there are people on the comment section. There's almost 30,000 comment sections under his YouTube video. There are people that are trolls that are just making insults. I'm not really going to deal with them. Those people have the right to do whatever they want. I don't have a problem with it. But I don't think Rogan's going to take those criticisms as seriously as there seem to be a lot of his core supporters that are giving heartfelt criticisms in these comment sections. And a lot of the comments will read something like, Joe Rogan helped change my life. I watch every one of his videos. This is the first time I've ever downvoted one. I'm unsubscribing. I'm disappointed. I thought Rogan was all for free speech. He sold out. Those are the type of comments that Rogan should be paying attention to, because that seems to be his core audience. Now, in full disclosure, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily Rogan's core audience. I watch about 1 in every 10 of his videos. I like a lot of them, but I'm not someone who was subscribed and was watching every one of his videos. So I would say if you would ask Rogan, honestly, he would say, yeah, I'll take any audience member I can, whether the casual or the hardcore supporter. But I think he really needs to be focusing on what his core supporters have been with him through thick and thin are saying about this video. And it seems that massively they are having a negative reaction to this. So as a result, Rogan ends up releasing 2 statements. The one was basically yesterday and one was kind of in the middle of the night today. So I'm going to read both these statements, give my impression on them, and then kind of finish up with being as objective as I could, looking at this in a good way for Joe and a bad way for Joe, and giving my opinion on how it could be interpreted by his fan base. So his first statement. Now, these statements, I'm going to be reading them off Rogan's Facebook page, but they were also on his Instagram page, his Twitter page, and other places like that. So here was his first statement. I had Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, on the podcast Friday, and many people felt I didn't grill him hard enough on Twitter censoring right-wing voices. Well, that's kind of an understatement. It wasn't just that. A lot of people thought this was basically an infomercial for Jack Dorsey and Twitter, and that you actually not only didn't grill him hard enough, you actually helped him weasel out of having any accountability for this. Now, the idea that this was just Twitter censoring right-wing voices, I feel is erroneous, but I'll get to that a little lower down here. He continues, my intention going into the podcast was to talk to him about that, but also to talk to him about the responsibilities that come with managing the worldwide conversation with a platform that no one ever saw coming. The other idea I wanted to discuss was what possible new technologies could be the next version of social media. This is kind of, it seems to me as if maybe Rogan's a little tone deaf here. As I explained in my video yesterday about this, I think that a lot of Rogan's core supporters think that he first and foremost stood for the idea of free speech. They probably started paying attention to him with the Carlos Mencia thing, where it was like, yeah, he's not going to take any crap. He'll tell it like it is. And then his show starts off and it's like crazy. He's got people from the left and the right and artists and musicians and scientists of all ilks. People saying some crazy like conspiratorial stuff. Hey, it gives him a chance to say it. That's kind of the idea, free speech. He might challenge certain people more than others. That's fine. But the idea that he's having on there, it's all about free speech. And he's constantly talking about that in his shows. Even if he's considered more left-leaning, which I think Joe would say he's a more centrist or left-leaning person, he still seems to be able to bring people together from all sides on this idea of we shouldn't be silencing voices. Again, he could, through his own bias, challenges some people more than others. That's fine. But the fact that he had the person that maybe is the most egregious violator of censoring speech, I mean, yeah, he should give Jack Dorsey a chance to explain himself, but he should push back when it's clear that Dorsey's sidestepping the issue, like what happened. Instead, Rogan, like I said with the Covington situation, Rogan asks about Kathy Griffin. Look, Jack Dorsey's basically talking about, at this point in the interview, safety's the most important thing. We can't have people doxing. We can't have people making threats. And Joe Rogan's like, what about Kathy Griffin threatening these kids? And Dorsey sidesteps it. And it's not just that Rogan lets him sidestep it. It's then he goes, oh yeah, like didn't you kind of ban the original Twitter account that had the selective 1 minute footage of the Native American banging the drum in the Covington kid's face? Yeah, we did that, says Jack. So it allows him to skirt it's almost like Joe facilitated the move away instead of being like, whoa, Jack, we're literally talking about a celebrity with power calling for kids to be doxxed. How doesn't that meet the criteria when you censor all these other people? But instead, Joe didn't do that. So Joe's saying here, well, there were other things I wanted to talk to Jack about, so I didn't, But again, that's kind of tone deaf. That's fine, but I look at it like this. Imagine Jordan Peterson has a podcast, and the way Jordan Peterson became famous was arguing against this bill in Canada. It was called Bill C-16, and the idea was it was forcing people to use pronouns that people wanted them to use, the individuals wanted them to use. And Peterson said, "I'm not going to be, I'm not for government compelled speech," and he stood up to this bill, and that's how Peterson became famous. Now imagine Peterson has the authors of those bill on his podcast, and his first question's like, compelled speech a really bad thing. Why did you do this? And they're like, "Oh, we just thought it'd be good for transgenders." And Peterson's like, "Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about other things in your life. What do you think about other Canadian politics?" People would be outraged. This is the issue that everyone wanted Rogan to talk to Dorsey about. And it was even more important, not only because it's central to what Joe Rogan, what his core supporters think he is, the idea of not censoring people and free speech, but because no one ever talks to Dorsey. No one gets to have a fair interview with him. The mainstream media is not going to. They're in bed with Twitter. They want Twitter to be censoring accounts. That's why you see places like CNN, the New York Times, calling for the censorship of accounts of fake news and things like that on Twitter. So they're not going to hold his feet to the fire. So this seemed to be the one opportunity where it's like, finally, someone who's not mainstream gets to hold his feet to the fire. And Joe totally capitulates. So I'm not really buying his, "well, I had other things to talk to him about" excuse here. Moving on. He says, "I asked him about censorship, but some people on the right felt I didn't go after him hard enough. Some people, like whoever wrote this article, thinks I'm right-wing." I'll get to the article in a second. I don't think it's that big of a deal because we're talking about what Rogan's core supporters think. As far as this idea that some people on the right didn't feel that he went after him hard enough, again, I don't know if Rogan totally understands what his audience is saying here. Yeah, it is definitely true that Twitter censors right-wing voices more than others. That's definitely true, and I'll get to that in a second. But they also center centrist and left-wing ideals that aren't with the establishment Democratic Party. And I think a lot of the comments that you're seeing from Rogan supporters are people that are like, "Look, I'm a big Cal Kalinske fan or a Jimmy Dore fan," that are people on the left that are anti-war, and they're getting censored on platforms like Twitter or shadow banned and things like that. And so I'm upset too that you didn't hold Dorsey's feet to the fire. So it's not just right-wing people that are upset. And the fact that Joe thinks that, I think, it's maybe a mistake. Now, as far as it being right-wing, even though these other anti-establishment voices are being censored on the left and the center, clearly it's the right that's going on the most. And the reason this is important, if you check out a lot of my other videos I do, is the establishment left basically controls all of the institutions of cultural power in this country. And by these institutions, I mean them as organizations or institutions that have the power to shape public influence and things like that. It's almost all dominated by the establishment left wing, the establishment Democratic Party. So you take something like academia, almost all establishment left wing. The entertainment industry, including the music, Hollywood, athletics, almost all dominated by the left wing. I mean, even ESPN at this point, right? Then you have the mainstream media, clearly almost all dominated by the establishment left wing. And now you have these social media giants and these tech companies that, again, are almost dominated all by establishment left wing. Jack Dorsey being one of the epitomes of this, him and Zuckerberg, basically the two biggest figures. And so Rogan finally has a chance to ask him about this, and he doesn't. So you can see where the outrage is. They're literally becoming if social media goes and starts censoring right-wing voices, what's going to happen? And Rogan knows what's going to happen because he's had so many guests on and he's articulated his opinion. When you silence people and you put them in a box and they feel they don't have a voice, then bad things happen. So when Rogan finally has a chance to hold some accountability to one of the main people achieving that, leading to that end, he actually capitulates and helps them out instead. So as far as this article, yeah, he's referencing an article someone, I don't know what establishment was, but it's basically labeling him right-wing. Fine, yeah, I'm not really concerned with that. Yeah, of course, there's going to be people on the left that are so crazy they think anyone who's not more left of them is alt-right or something. We know that's a problem. He continues, "I'm not right-wing," he means, "and I don't even think that anyone who's paid attention to anything I've said believes that. It seems like someone wanted to do a controversial clickbaity title for an article regardless of whether or not it was accurate." Okay, whatever. As for the interview, I asked the questions I wanted to ask, and although his answers on some of them were vague, I felt like I got whatever I was going to get without being too confrontational. Well, that's troubling in its own right. These are the only questions that Rogan wanted to ask? That seems kind of troubling. And it's not just that they were vague, they were totally... A vague answer would be like, yeah, we need to do more. When he asked about Kathy Griffin, yeah, there's certain things that slip through, but we need to do more. That wasn't even his answer. His answer was totally skirting the issue. If someone says, keep in mind again what happened. Dorsey saying, we need to stop doxing, we need to stop threats, that's an a priori issue. And Rogan says, what about Kathy Griffin doxing kids and the people calling for attacks to these kids? And Dorsey totally steps the issue and it's like, yeah, looking in the future. So it's not just that the answer was vague, it was a total non-answer. And the fact that Rogan's like, these are the questions I wanted to ask, that's a little troubling, considering, I mean, maybe just Rogan isn't the free speech advocate everyone thought he was, his core supporters thought, if this is truly all that he wanted to ask. Now, the idea of not being confrontational. Yeah, you're going to have, like, the people that are like, we wanted, to basically just scream at Jack Dorsey for 2 hours. Like, that's not me, and I don't think that's what most of his reasonable fans are suggesting. They're saying we just wanted some pushback. It's not just that you weren't confrontational, it was that this interview was nothing. It was an infomercial for Jack Dorsey. You allowed him to walk all over you. And you are more confrontational. I don't know if that's the word I'd use. You challenge people all the time. It seems, though, that those people always happen to be on the right. So a Steven Crowder, a Stefan Molyneux, a Candace Owens, a Nick DiPaolo, you'll go after them hard. But when someone comes out, and as you should, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's great, but there seems to be a clear double standard. And it's not just a double standard on any leftist we're talking about here. We're talking about what your supporters think is your core issue of free speech. And you decide, nah, I'm not going to push back on that. So you'll push back on Nick DiPaolo about some of his beliefs that aren't really what your core ideas are. You'll push back on Steven Crowder about marijuana. But when it comes to censoring people in free speech, some of which were your friends, like Alex Jones, and you have nothing to say. That's what people find outrageous. Finally, an important issue, and like I said, the one time we have to hear an alt media person finally hold Jack Dorsey's feet to the fire, and you skip on it. So it's not a matter of just being confrontational. It's a matter of just actually having him just be like, well, that's not an answer. And you do that all the time. So, continuing. There have also been talks of us editing the video and deleting disparaging YouTube comments. That's not true. The video messed up while we were filming and the TriCaster crashed. As far as I know, Jamie put it all back together. As far as the YouTube comments, we don't delete those. I don't know how it works, but I suspect there's some form of what Dorsey talked about with Twitter, where machine learning downvotes certain perspectives or what they seem offensive or rude comments. What definitely isn't is Jamie or anyone else on my team deleting things. I definitely think there's a discussion to be had about censoring comments through computer programs or manual deleting. I want you folks to know we're not responsible for any of that. I will at this point take Joe and his word for this, that I don't see any proof that they're responsible of it, but you can understand why people are upset. Now, if what Joe's saying is true, that's a separate conversation. One, I would expect him to talk more about this and be outraged that this is happening to his fans based on some algorithm or someone manually at YouTube doing this. And when it talks about downvoting certain perspectives that they could deem offensive or rude, keep in mind the two big comments that were downvoted were from Sargon of Akkad and Mark Dice. And neither of those ended up disappearing. Neither of those seemed to be offensive or rude at all. In fact, most of them weren't even negatively, specifically directed at Rogan himself. It was towards Dorsey. Let's just take the Sargon one. Sargon just said, basically, hey, Jack, at this point in the interview, you say that social media is a right for everyone to have. Then what right do you have to delete accounts? That's not an offensive, rude comment. That's a legitimate question. That's something that Joe should have asked. So if it's really frightening if YouTube is censoring and trying to shape perspective so much that even gets voted down as somehow offensive. So I would expect Rogan to be very concerned about this, and we should all be concerned that this, it just goes to show that social media, it's a fake reality, that there are things operating behind the scenes that are pushing a certain narrative. I've never seen this on other YouTube videos, so again, if Rogan was having Jamie or himself manually delete comments, that's really bad. But at this point, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. So he finishes up. I do my best, and if I didn't fulfill some of your expectations, I understand. Honestly, I think I learned more from negative reactions than positive ones, and I truly appreciate having a public review of these conversations because it's part of how I get better at this shit. That's reasonable, and I feel the same way when a lot of time constructive criticism is good. You'd rather have a negative comment that says, hey, you could do this better. Now, I'm sure he doesn't appreciate the negative, you look like a toe, or, just people yelling at him comments. It's like, okay. But maybe he's honest that he does truly appreciate the honest, constructive, negative opinions, and hopefully he does take it to heart. So I'm willing to give him that. And this kind of segues into his second comment, which was given midnight today or something like that. So just scrolling up his Facebook page to get to those comments. He says, good news for everyone that was annoyed we didn't cover censorship and deplatforming enough on the podcast with Jack Dorsey, because he's offered to come back on again. I'm going to take the criticism to heart and research all the high-profile cases on the right and on the left, and any instances might have been viewed as double standards. Anything in particular you think is important, please leave a mention in the comments, and I'll have someone make a list. One thing I really liked that Jack said was that he felt the ability to communicate online was a right that we should all have. Maybe we can have a road to redemption for the people that have been banned. I'll keep you folks posted when we work out the details and the date. So there's kind of two ways to look at this comment. So first is the one that's more favorable to Joe, and that is, I think we all want people that we listen to, particularly in kind of a media platform, to listen to fan feedback. And so it's refreshing to hear someone say, hey, I heard you loud and clear, I'm going to listen, and we'll act accordingly. Too many times it seems like these platforms are tone deaf. For example, like Twitter. You have tons of people on Twitter like, hey, Jack, what are you doing? And it doesn't seem like Jack listens to them. It seems like he has an agenda. So you could say, well, hey, this is Rogan being different. This is him trying to listen to his fan base. And there's a couple things to say on this level. One is a lot of the feedback I got from my video on various sites, and you see in the comment section on these statements and on the YouTube video itself with the interview with Dorsey, is a lot of Rogan fans and supporters saying, oh, like Rogan cares that some of you said unsubscribe. He doesn't care. Well, in this, if we're looking at it in this way, clearly he does. It wasn't, maybe he doesn't care about one person unsubscribing, but the massive negative reaction he got, he does care. So, I guess all those trolls that were just saying, who cares what you think? Rogan doesn't care. I guess they were wrong, right? And the other thing is, like, even in this world, you could still say it's good for that to happen, but let's get to what this means on the negative side of things. I think that even this is kind of tone deaf, this statement, and let's take it in that it's not tone deaf just for a second in the best possible light. In this way of looking at it, though, it's like, okay, but why did it require fans being upset for you to realize this was an issue? So does that mean you were unprepared? You weren't aware of how much this censorship was occurring on Twitter? You weren't aware of the double standards? I mean, does that speak to kind of your preparation for all of your guests? I mean, this is the big issue. Every guest, excuse me, so many guests you've had on have talked about this issue, and you personally have friends that have been banned from Twitter. And so many of your guests have been banned from Twitter. So the fact that you weren't prepared, sorry, I didn't know. Like, and then there's more that you could look at this in a negative light. First off, look at the language he uses. For everyone that was annoyed we didn't cover censorship, I think it was a little more than annoyed. Again, this was supposed to be your core issue. Are you going to have Mike Tyson on and just not talk about boxing? And then say, oh, for those that were annoyed we didn't talk about boxing, he'll come back on, we'll talk about boxing. Or whatever, It just seems strange. It's like, okay. And then, like, when we look at all the other things, he says, maybe there'll be a road to redemption for people that have been banned. But that's kind of the least of the issues, right? Why are they banned in the first place? Is that where you're going to focus? Like, you're going to just capitulate and say, oh, yeah, we get it, Jack. These people deserve to be banned. Hey, is there a possibility they could grovel to you and they could ever come back? And Dorsey would be like, perhaps some groveling will get them to come back. Yeah, that's not what the core focus should be. The core focus should be like, if you think, as Joe says, that people have a right to have online discussions, then what right do you have to kick people off unless it's damaging people's health and safety? And why the double standard then when people on the left seek to criticize and dox children or other things like that? That's perfectly fine. And not just random people, celebrities, blue checkmark people. That's perfectly fine. That's where the focus needs to be, the double standard, and the fact that there's a clear agenda from Twitter, just like all these other social media platforms, to push the establishment Democratic narrative. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or not. That should upset all of us. And we thought that Joe Rogan is someone who's supposedly this free speech advocate. That would be the issue he would go after. And then there's a greater question of, is this really a good thing? Like, what it seems like it could be is just like, so Rogan, and if you look at his first statement, he's like, oh, I asked the questions I wanted to and I didn't want to be too confrontational. So what, now you're willing to be confrontational? What's the difference? Oh, you realized you were going to lose income or lose fans? And so now all of a sudden you change your way of doing things? That doesn't seem like necessarily a good thing. On one hand, you could look at it and be like, well, he's listening to his fans. But on the other hand, so what? You just sold out what you told us in the last video. I don't like to be confrontational. I got the answers I wanted. I asked the questions I wanted. Now all of a sudden, a day later, it's like, oh, I'll change that because the negative reaction's been so robust. That proves to us that you're not really concerned about being non-confrontational as much as it is you did exactly what you wanted to in this first video. Now, this doesn't address things like, this statement doesn't address other things comments had, such as that I did in my last video, like he threw his friends like Alex Jones under the bus, that he never really acknowledged that Cash App one of his sponsors, the parent company of Cash App, is ran by Jack Dorsey. And it just seems like, my ultimate reaction to this is, and this is just my personal opinion, is that, like, there is part of me that's like, okay, let's see what happens if he has Jack back on. It's easy to say, it's easy for Jack to say he'll be back on. It's easy for Joe to say he'll be back on. When will it be? 3 years from now? Will it ever happen? What are we supposed to think in the interim? My prediction that I said, I'm not sure if I said this in my last video, but places I was discussing this, I said, Rogan will see this negative reaction and he's going to seek to, like, do a 180 and be like, oh, we'll bring on Gavin McInnes, or we'll bring on Alex Jones, or we'll bring on Steven Crowder, and I'll just softball them the whole time, be like, yeah, you're right, I should have asked Dorsey more questions. Well, too late. When you had your opportunity, you didn't. And that in-the-moment reaction kind of showed more about, to me, who you really are and what you really think than after you hear fans complain. Now, I do appreciate that you're listening to fans, and we'll see. But again, who knows if this second interview will ever happen. The reaction was so negative. I mean, I'll be surprised if Dorsey... I'd give it a chance. I'd listen to it. But until then, what are we supposed to think? And I think that we have to question, like, is Joe Rogan someone who's going to totally change his opinions and change his stances based on, oh, I don't want to lose, he'll be a shill for the mainstream up until the point where he starts to lose fans and they go, no, here, come back. I won't shill anymore. So, I don't know. That's just my feelings on it. It felt to me like, my personal feeling is Joe's more left-leaning, that Joe wants to be part of the in-crowd. He lives out in California. He wants to be seen as someone that's, like, hip with these tech-type people. He doesn't want his Twitter account or things that he uses for ad revenue or his sponsors to pull out that Jack Dorsey's in charge of. And so he kind of softballed it. And he did it. He had Dorsey on. I think he thought he would get away with it, that he could have Dorsey on and then be able to say afterwards, yeah, I asked Dorsey some tough questions. I thought he was an interesting guy. I thought he tried to do a good job. And I don't think it came away that way, at least to me. So, in conclusion, I think you could look at these two statements and you could say, if you're someone that says, good, this is what I wanted to see Rogan bring Dorsey back on. I think that's a good thing. That's fine. I have no problem if that's your interpretation. Or you could be totally cynical and be like, look, this is just him trying to save face. He only changed his opinion. We saw the real Joe Rogan in his interview with Jack Dorsey, and now he realizes there was such a negative reaction. He's trying to save his fan base and save his revenue stream, and so he's going to claim to be more diligent and more confrontational, ask actual legitimate questions. I'm somewhere in between. I lean more towards the second camp than the first, but I'm willing to give it a second chance, so we'll see what happens. I'll keep you updated on this story more because, again, the reason I think this is such an important story is everything is controlled. All these cultural institutions is controlled by the establishment left. And when you start to have, like, the idea of the intellectual dark lab and people like Joe Rogan that's supposed to be all about free speech, when even they get so big to a point where they're afraid to confront the people that are against free speech, it seems like a really frightening thing. Is there going to be any room left eventually? Is there anyone that can't be co-opted? So that's why I think this story is important. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I put a lot of content out where I'm discussing kind of the idea of the censorship, the establishment left, politics, and things like that you might enjoy. So please check out some of my other videos. Like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications if you want. And I'll be putting more videos out daily. So, all right, everyone. Have a good one.